tariffs, diplomatic visits, a vote of no confidence, and more. Today is Thursday, May 1st, and welcome back to Pacific Airwaves, a podcast on the Pacific Islands from the Southeast Asia Program, the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative, and the Australia Chair at CSIS. I'm Andreyka and John, in the studio with John Auger from the Australia Chair. Hey John, what's up?
Hey Andreyka, good to be here with you.
Great to be here with you. I'm glad to be back again. I know that for listeners of the Pacific Airwaves podcast, we've been rotating out our hosts. You'll see Monica again next month. But for today, I'll be in the chair with John.
Anyway, let's dive into the news making waves into the Pacific.
Of course, we have to start today's podcast off with the one thing that has been dominating the news cycle recently here in Washington and across the world, tariffs. Since our last episode, President Donald Trump announced and then subsequently paused reciprocal tariffs on nearly all goods entering the United States.
In the Pacific, 10 countries were hit with the baseline tariff of 10%, but a few were targeted by higher rates. Fiji at 32%, Nauru at 30%, and Vanuatu at 23%. Meanwhile, Niue and Palau were left off the list altogether.
So let's unpack what these tariffs might mean for the Pacific. Pacific Island countries aren't particularly big goods exporters, but instead their economies are dominated by services like tourism. But still, trade in the Pacific will undoubtedly be impacted by these tariffs, especially the three countries that received a higher tariff rate. Now, trade balances are a common metric referred to by the Trump administration to establish whether a country has, in Trump's view, taken advantage of the United States. Generally, the larger the trade deficit the United States has with the country, the larger the punitive tariffs placed on it.
Fiji is the only Pacific Island country that runs a consistent trade surplus with the United States. The U.S. accounts for around 10% of Fiji's total trade. That includes both imports and exports. Fiji's biggest export to the U.S. is bottled spring water, including the infamous Fiji water that's sold in practically every American supermarket. It also exports kava, fish products, sugar confectionery, and wood to the U.S.
Fiji Prime Minister Sitiveni Rabuka responded to the tariffs by admitting that his government hadn't seen it coming. He stated that Fiji doesn't have the economic weight to counter the tariffs, so it will have to weather the storm and roll with the punches as it seeks out new markets for its exports.
Unlike Fiji, Vanuatu and Nauru don't consistently have trade surpluses with the U.S., but in 2024, they did in fact both run a surplus. Conversely, in 2023, both countries had a trade deficit with the U.S. For Vanuatu, its primary export to the U.S. is kava, which makes up around 70% of the country's exports. So a tariff on these exports from a market as important as the U.S. will have a big impact on Vanuatu's economy.
And finally, the world's smallest island nation of Nauru only exports about $1 to $2 million in goods to the United States per year, but was hit with a pretty high tariff rate. Now, most of this trade is made up of fish and some calcium phosphate, but because fish products imported into the United States from Nauru makes up such a small trade volume, it is unlikely that tariffs on Nauru will have the desired impact of redirecting fish trade within the United States. Nauru exports much more to other countries, including Thailand, the Philippines, and New Zealand.
As of right now, Trump's tariffs are on a 90-day pause that will end on July 9th. It's still unknown whether these tariff rates on Pacific Island countries will remain the same if and when tariffs do come into effect. While the tariffs may not be economically significant for many of the Pacific Island countries, they have a major impact on the U.S. image in the region. The tariffs, combined with the U.S. aid cuts across the region, signal U.S. disengagement. We'll continue to bring you updates as things develop.
Now, surrounding the U.S. tariff rollout, there were also multiple diplomatic visits to the Pacific to reassure the region. At the end of March, U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth made his first trip to the Pacific. He stopped in Hawaii, Guam, the Philippines, and Japan in a bid to reassure allies and partners about U.S. commitment to the region.
Hegseth's first stop in Hawaii consisted of an address to military personnel at Indo-Pacific Command and a tour of the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency headquarters. He stated that our alliances and partnerships in the Indo-Pacific matter a great deal to the United States. They matter because of the Indo-Pacific is the region of consequence.
Next, the Secretary visited Guam, where the United States hosts a major military presence that is critical to maintaining U.S. defense posture in the region. Besides touring military facilities and receiving capability briefings, Hegseth also met with Guam and CNMI leadership.
In these engagements, Hegseth reiterated the U.S. defense commitment to Guam and other territories in the Pacific. He stated that the United States was going to continue to stay committed to our presence here, and stated that the United States wasn't seeking a war with China, but that the United States needs to be ready.
While in Guam, Hegseth met with President Wesley W. Simina of the Federated States of Micronesia. FSM has a compact of free association with the United States, making it a key partner in the region for economic and security cooperation. The two sides announced in a joint statement that the United States Department of Defense would begin planning and construction on key infrastructure projects in the state of Yap. This is expected to bring $2 billion in investment into FSM and expand the capabilities of U.S. forces on the island.
In the Philippines and Japan, Hegseth reiterated its support for both treaty allies in the face of Chinese aggression. This trip by Hegseth, which was overshadowed by the Signal Gate scandal, offered some sense of reassurance to regional allies in the face of the erratic Trump policies. However, some of these reassurances wore off a bit after the April 2nd tariff announcement.
In the aftermath of the U.S. tariff announcement, New Zealand Foreign Minister Winston Peters visited multiple Pacific Island nations. He visited Tonga, Hawaii, Fiji, and ended in Vanuatu. His goal was to demonstrate New Zealand's commitment to the region during a period of uncertainty.
That's right. A key aspect of his visits touched on economics and trade. Having dinner with Fijian Prime Minister Sitiveni Rabuka, Peters and Rabuka discussed boosting New Zealand-Fiji total trade to $2 billion. In Tonga, development assistance programs for climate projects, infrastructure construction, and maritime safety capacity building were on the agenda. Peters also outlined the easing of the visa process for Tongans and other Pacific Island nations, something the region has long argued for. Peters also announced $10 million in support for Vanuatu's earthquake recovery and a new renewable energy project focused on solar battery energy storage systems.
Peters' meetings did have a security focus too, especially his engagements in Hawaii. Now, this is where he really made the argument for continued U.S. engagement in the region, for both its own security and economic interests. He noted the anxiety countries in the Pacific are feeling about changes to U.S. policy and stated that a trade war was in nobody's interest. He stressed the importance of longtime partners working together on these issues.
I'm sure this is just the first of what will be many visits from leaders from around the region to assess the impacts of the changing economic and strategic environment.
Beyond the high-level diplomatic engagements, the Pacific is also navigating a range of regional and national issues. Let's start with New Zealand's new visa changes that could boost regional mobility and flexibility.
New Zealand is taking significant steps to simplify entry for Pacific Island citizens. Starting in July, visitor visa holders from Pacific Islands forum countries can enter New Zealand multiple times over a 24-month period, with stays of up to 6 months in any 12-month period, though capped at 9 months total across 18 months.
A new visa-free travel trial will also be launched in November. Travelers from Pacific Island forum countries holding a valid Australian visa, whether for tourism, work, study, or family, will be able to enter New Zealand using a New Zealand Electronic Travel Authority, staying up to 3 months. This exemption won't apply to those merely transiting through Australia, and current visa requirements remain in effect until the trial begins.
This is Pacific Airwaves, so now let's take a dive under the water and talk about deep-sea mining. Deep-sea mining has become a hot topic in the Pacific because of how lucrative the industry is. Last episode, we discussed that there has been talks between China and Kiribati on a potential deep-sea mining agreement. Now, mining companies are making strategic moves to bypass the International Seabed Authority, or the ISA, framework, which regulates mining activity and ensures protection of marine resources.
You might remember Canadian firm The Metals Company, which recently canceled its deep-sea mining contract with a Kiribati state-owned company. Now, The Metals Company has turned its attention toward U.S. territory, American Samoa, using its U.S. subsidiary, Impossible Metals, to request the U.S. government auction off mining rights near American Samoa's waters.
The Metals Company is playing some strategic moves here. The ISA is responsible for managing all mineral-related activities in the international seabed, according to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS. But since UNCLOS has not been ratified by the U.S., the Metals Company and Impossible Metals are effectively working to sidestep ISA regulations.
And this scenario might become a reality, as the Trump administration recently announced a new executive order that would allow the Department of Commerce to regulate U.S. companies' exploration and exploitation activities within its exclusive economic zone in areas beyond its national jurisdiction.
This is a huge move for the U.S. and underscores its deep interest in securing its supply chains of critical minerals, especially as China placed export restrictions on some critical minerals that U.S. companies are reliant on.
Alternatively, the ISA Secretary General has voiced serious concerns about this, and experts warn that this could trigger a free-for-all scenario in deep-sea mining. This could undermine decades of ocean governance. And for Pacific countries whose economies and cultures are intrinsically tied to healthy oceans, unregulated deep-sea mining could have serious environmental and economic impacts.
Countries in the region have diverging views on deep-sea mining. The Cook Islands and Nauru support it due to the economic benefits it can bring them while advancing green technologies, which are where many of these minerals will go toward. Other countries like Palau and Fiji are more wary of the environmental risks that mining poses. In other ocean-related news, the Trump administration also signed an executive order on April 17th, reopening the Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monument, which is about 750 miles west of Hawaii, to U.S. commercial fishing.
This executive order reverses protections made under President Barack Obama to expand the size of the Marine Reserve by 500,000 square miles. President Trump said that the decision was designed to loosen regulations that overly burden America's commercial fishing, aquaculture, and fish processing industries, in order to make the United States the world's dominant seafood leader.
Right? The decision has drawn mixed reactions across the Pacific. Among the supporters of the order are representatives from the Northern Mariana Islands, American Samoa, and the Western Pacific Fishery Management Council. They believe that this move would bolster U.S. food security, aid American Samoa's economy, and counter Chinese illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing activity. Their main argument is that the U.S. tuna fleet has been unfairly restricted while foreign vessels continue to flaunt regulations by fishing nearby.
And on the other hand, critics, including environmental advocates, warn that this kind of environmental rollback threatens ecosystems and endangers marine species. In all, they argue that this executive order undermines long-term conservation efforts.
Ultimately, the order reignites a long-standing debate between economic access for U.S. fisheries and the need for marine conservation and sustainable management in the Pacific. Now, we will head to Port Moresby, where Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister, James Marape, has just survived a dramatic no-confidence vote, one that's been weeks in the making.
Let's rewind a little bit. Last month, the motion was introduced by opposition MP Sir Puka Temu, who nominated Enga Governor Sir Peter Ipatas as the alternative prime minister. In his remarks, Temu described the vote as a matter of principle, not ambition.
The motion was seconded by Wabag MP Lino Tom. Both he and Temu criticized the government's performance and called on Marape to take responsibility for what they described as poor governance. The vote proceeded despite several points of order from opposition MPs who argued that the Speaker was limiting debate, contrary to the intent of the Supreme Court ruling.
Speaker Joe Pomat moved the question to a vote without allowing extended debate, prompting warnings from opposition members that this could be considered contempt of court. Nevertheless, the vote was carried out, and the motion failed.
After the vote, Marape addressed Parliament, defending his record and thanking MPs who supported him. He referred to himself as the country's chief servant and pledged to continue working for the nation's development.
This vote follows a recent constitutional amendment introduced by the Marape government. The amendment extends the grace period after an unsuccessful no-confidence vote to 18 months. So with this vote behind him and the new amendment in place, Marape is now insulated from further no-confidence votes until late 2026. Papua New Guinea's next general election is expected in 2027.
Parliament has adjourned until May 27th, but will continue to monitor developments and bring updates on the government's performance and any further legal or political challenges. And that covers it for this episode.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Pacific Airwaves. Did we miss anything you wanted to hear about? If so, please write to us at searadio@csis.org or DM us on your favorite social media platform. If you don't follow us already, please subscribe and give us a rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever streaming platform you listen to us on.
Marla Hiller is our producer, and our interns are Ryan Bean, Gemma King, Sophia Data, and Zia Guo. My name is John Auger.
And I'm Andreyka and John.
And we'll see you next month for another episode of Pacific Airwaves.